I let my sister-in-law throw her baby shower at my house, and she tried to kick me out during the party. The house smelled like fresh paint and cardboard for the first 3 weeks, and that smell made me stupidly happy. Every morning before work, I'd stand in the kitchen with my coffee and just stare at that slightly crooked row of cabinets, like they were proof I'd finally gotten something right. Nothing fancy about them. One door stuck whenever it got humid. The counters were cheaper than the sample we'd originally picked out, and the back porch tilted just enough that every glass of iced tea slid toward the railing. I loved every bit of it. My husband and I had saved for years. Skipped vacations, drove beat-up cars, ate more reheated pasta than 2 grown adults should admit to. I managed a small bank branch, which mostly meant dealing with broken printers, angry customers, and telling grown people that yelling wasn't going to unbounce a payment. My husband worked construction for a regional company, and right before we closed on the house, they transferred him to another city. The transfer was supposed to be 2 months. Then it turned into 4. Then his supervisor asked for a little longer, which is corporate speak for nobody knows anything, so stop asking. So I moved into our first real home basically by myself. The house became my whole routine. Work, grocery store, laundry, phone call, sleep. Fridays I'd clean way more than necessary because my husband was coming home. Sundays I'd stand in the driveway and watch him drive off, then go inside and switch on every single light, because somehow that made the quiet feel less aggressive. I wasn't miserable. I was proud. Those are 2 different things, and I held on to that difference hard. His younger brother and his wife lived nearby. My sister-in-law and I had always been polite to each other, the way 2 women are polite when they both know they'd never pick each other as friends. She wasn't openly mean. She was always measuring something. I got a promotion, she'd wonder out loud if the stress was even worth it. We went out to dinner, she'd mention how they preferred to save their money instead. She had a gift for turning any conversation into a scoreboard, and then acting shocked when someone noticed she was keeping score. Her interest in the house started small. She asked for pictures during the renovation. Then she wanted to know what our monthly payment was. Then how much we'd put down, whether my parents had helped, whether the bank gave me a better rate since I worked there. The first few times I laughed it off, figured she was just curious. People get nosy about houses. It's basically a national pastime. Still, something about how she looked around during her first visit bugged me. She wasn't just noticing the rooms, she was appraising them. Opened the pantry without asking, walked out onto the back porch, stood in the spare bedroom with both hands resting under her belly. This would make such a cute nursery, she said. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. Maybe someday. She turned, still scanning the room. You 2 don't even know when you're having kids, though, right? The sentence landed weird. Not quite insulting enough to call out, but not exactly harmless either. No, I said. We don't. She nodded like I'd just confirmed something she needed. Then she walked back into the hallway and asked whether the walls were load-bearing. I should have paid more attention to that question. I should have paid attention to a lot of things. Instead, I handed her a glass of lemonade and told myself she was just nesting in other people's houses because her apartment felt small. That explanation was generous. It was also dead wrong. We had the official housewarming on a Saturday, when my husband could be home the whole weekend. My parents came early. My brother-in-law hauled in folding chairs. My sister-in-law showed up in a pale dress, carrying a tray she made sure everyone knew she'd assembled herself. She was 6 months pregnant by then, deep into the phase where every person in the room was expected to notice her stomach before they noticed her face. She trailed me through the kitchen while I refilled drinks. What was the down payment again? She asked. I looked at her. She laughed. I forgot. I gave her a vague answer, which only opened the door wider. How much did the kitchen renovation cost? Were the appliances included? Did the previous owners leave the dining table? Was the neighborhood considered expensive? Had we stretched our budget? Did my parents chip in? She ran her fingers along the counter while she asked, like she was checking whether the surface actually matched the price tag. At one point she planted herself in the living room and announced the space would be perfect for big family gatherings. My mom raised an eyebrow at me from across the room. I just shrugged. I honestly didn't think much of it, figured it was just her usual comparison habit. Later, while my husband was showing someone the garage, she cornered me by the stairs. You're lucky, she said. And I had no idea yet just how true that sentence would turn out to be, or how soon I'd have to do something about it. It didn't sound like a compliment. We worked for it, I said, and immediately regretted the edge in my voice. She pressed one hand to her stomach. I didn't say you didn't. There it was. That tiny shift where suddenly I was the rude one. I softened, because that's what I always did. I know. Sorry. I'm tired. She smiled, satisfied, and asked whether the sofa was new. The party ended without any obvious disaster. Everyone hugged. People took leftovers home. My sister-in-law lingered on the porch longer than anyone else, glancing back through the open door while my brother-in-law loaded the car. When she finally left, she told me the house had such good energy for gatherings. A few weeks later, she called while I was closing the branch. I let the first call go. One of the tellers had a cash discrepancy and I was trying to figure out if we'd made a counting error. She called again. Then again. Are you okay? I asked the second I picked up. I'm fine, she said brightly. I just need to ask you something before I lose my nerve. She explained that every event space she'd looked at for her baby shower was too expensive, too small, too ugly, or booked on all the wrong dates. Her apartment couldn't fit more than a handful of people. Her mother had offered the backyard, but apparently the bathroom wasn't guest-friendly, a phrase I still don't fully understand. Then she said, your house would be perfect. She kept going before I could respond. She'd handle the food. She'd clean up. She'd decorate. I wouldn't have to lift a finger. Just close friends and family. The weather should be mild enough to use the porch and yard. It would mean so much to her. Her voice cracked, just slightly, enough to remind me she was pregnant and stressed and apparently one unavailable event hall away from falling apart. I hesitated. She heard it. Please. I know it's your house. I wouldn't ask if I had another option. I thought about my empty weekdays. I thought about how hard my husband had been working to keep peace in his family while stuck out of town. I thought maybe doing something generous would finally make my sister-in-law stop treating me like competition. Mostly, I thought saying yes would be easier than explaining why I wanted to say no. Okay, I said. As long as we agree on the guest count, and nothing changes without asking me first. She squealed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. You're amazing. Seriously, Claire, I will owe you forever. I laughed. Let's not make it dramatic. Oh, I'm making it dramatic. This is saving me. We picked a Saturday when I could trade shifts with another manager. She promised to send over the guest list and a schedule. Right before hanging up, she added, this is going to be so beautiful. Planning started the following weekend, and it got intense fast. My sister-in-law showed up with a thick notebook, fabric swatches, and a list broken into categories, color themes, table measurements, food estimates, and a sketch of my own living room featuring furniture I didn't own. I thought you were keeping this simple, I said. This is simple, she said. You should see what I wanted originally. She walked through the rooms, jotting notes as she went. The dining table would move against the wall. The sofa needed to shift closer to the window. The entryway mirror might throw glare in photos. She said all of it like she was stating facts, not asking permission. I reminded her the house still had to function before and after the party. She waved her pen. Of course. Then added 3 more items to her list. During that first planning visit, she brought up a woman who ran a small local event business, someone who, according to my sister-in-law, sometimes hired extra hands for showers, birthday parties, small weddings. My sister-in-law had been hunting for flexible work she could do once the baby came, and she figured this party could double as a showcase for what she could pull off. That explained a lot. It also made me more patient with her than I probably should have been. At a HomeGoods run, she picked up a framed print and held it against her chest. This would look so much better over your fireplace than those family photos. I laughed, assuming she was teasing. I like my family photos. They're fine. They're just very personal. I stared at her. That's usually the point. She smiled like I was being cute. I mean, we needed to look clean for the pictures. I should have ended that conversation right there. Instead, I told her she could move 1 or 2 frames temporarily on the day of the shower, as long as she put them back. She nodded and changed the subject so fast I didn't clock that she'd only heard the part she wanted to hear. Over the next few visits, comments about the house turned into comments about what she'd do differently. She'd paint the hallway a warmer color. She'd swap out the curtains. She'd use the spare bedroom as a nursery. She'd build shelves in the kitchen. One day she stood by the sliding door and said, if this were ours, we'd put a little play area right there. I was carrying a box of napkins. I stopped. If this were yours? She blinked, laughed. You know what I mean. No, actually. I mean it. If we had a place like this. My husband caught the changes during a weekend visit. Half the dining room was buried under supplies, and a stack of rented tablecloths sat in the hallway. "This is bigger than I thought," he said. I told him about the event business, about her wanting to impress the owner. He frowned. "Did my brother agree to all this?" "I assume so." "That doesn't sound like an answer." I texted my brother-in-law. He replied that he knew she was planning the shower and appreciated us helping. I asked whether he knew about the rentals, the extra decorations. "She said she had it handled," he sent back. My husband offered to call him. I said no. The party was less than 3 weeks out, and nothing terrible had happened yet. I didn't want to start a fight over balloons and tablecloths. He looked unconvinced but dropped it. A few days later, my sister-in-law showed up with printed mock-ups for thank you cards. She kept them face down on the counter while we talked food. When I reached for them, she slid them straight back into her folder. "Not final," she said. I remember that moment clearly, because it was the first time I felt something sharper than irritation. A small, cold warning. "What's on them?" I asked. "Just the theme. You'll see." I told myself she wanted it to be a surprise. I told myself pregnancy had made her controlling because she felt powerless about everything else. I told myself I was just helping family. Meanwhile, she was building a version of this party where I barely existed. 4 days before the shower, she proposed a photo display, her relationship with my brother-in-law, their wedding, the pregnancy. That sounded sweet. She wanted to use a few of my living room frames because they matched the decor, and I agreed to lend her 3. When I got home from work the next evening, 7 frames were missing. She'd let herself in with the spare key I'd given her for setup. I found my wedding photo, a picture of my parents, and a shot of my husband and me on our first apartment balcony, all stacked face down in the guest room. In their place, pictures of her and my brother-in-law. One of them holding an ultrasound image. One from their wedding. A close-up of their hands resting over her stomach. I stood in the living room, purse still on my shoulder, feeling like I'd walked into someone else's house. She came out of the kitchen carrying ribbon. "Oh, good, you're home. Can you help me decide where to put the dessert sign?" I pointed at the bare spots on the wall. "Why did you move all of these for the photo timeline?" I said 3 frames. "I know. But 3 looked uneven. So you took 7? She sighed. Didn't apologize. Just sighed. "It's temporary." I picked up my parents' photo and set it back on the shelf. She watched me do it. "That one doesn't fit." "It fits because it's my shelf. Claire, I'm not saying it can never be there. I'm saying, for the pictures. The party isn't a real estate listing." Her mouth tightened. "I just want things to look good." They looked good before. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then she pressed a palm to her stomach and said the baby had been moving all day because she was stressed. I told her the picture of my parents stayed. She agreed, with the expression of someone being forced into a wildly unreasonable compromise. An hour later, while I was in the garage, she took it down again. I found it face down beside the cleaning supplies. That's when I finally lost it. I carried it back into the living room and asked, louder than I meant to, "What is wrong with you?" She looked genuinely offended. "Excuse me? I told you this stays. And I told you it throws off the display." "I don't care." "Well, I do." The words came out of her so fast we both froze. She recovered first. "I mean, I care about the party." "No. You care about controlling my house." I apologized for yelling. I did not apologize for the picture. She left soon after, and I spent the night putting frames back where they belonged. By morning I felt guilty and stubborn in equal measure. My husband called before work. I gave him only part of what happened, because I knew the full version would get me told to cancel the whole thing. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" he asked. "It's one day." That wasn't my question. "I'll handle it." He went quiet. You always say that right before handling something you shouldn't have had to handle in the first place. The day before the shower, my sister-in-law came back with my brother-in-law and 2 friends. She acted like our fight had never happened. Furniture got moved, boxes opened, food trays stacked up in the fridge. The house slowly transformed. And despite everything, it looked beautiful. That almost made it worse. I kept helping until everything was ready, moving through the house on autopilot. The next morning, 20 minutes before guests were due, my sister-in-law stood in my kitchen in a new dress, adjusting an earring, and asked whether I had plans to visit my parents today. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain just rejected the sentence. "You want me to leave?" She avoided my eyes. "Most of the guests are my friends. It might be more comfortable." "For who?" "For everyone." I set down the tray I was holding. This is my house. I know that, she said quickly. But people think, she stopped. People think what? Her face shifted, just slightly. But enough. I don't want awkward questions about who lives here. And suddenly every missing photo made sense. I stared at her, waiting for the rest of the sentence. She didn't finish it. Who exactly thinks you live here? I asked. She crossed her arms over her stomach. Nobody said that. You just said people might ask who lives here. I meant they might be confused. Why would they be confused unless you told them something confusing? Her eyes flicked toward the living room, where the dessert table sat beneath photos of her and my brother-in-law. My wedding picture was gone again. So was the small framed shot of my husband standing in front of the house on closing day. She told me I was overreacting. Then she admitted she'd let a few people assume the house was hers, because it was easier than explaining the real situation. What situation needs explaining? She said people in her new professional circle expected her to have a certain level of stability. I actually laughed. So your solution was to borrow mine. That's not what happened. Then what happened? She asked me again to leave. Not suggested. Asked. No, I said. I'm not leaving my own house. She flinched like I'd slapped her. I called my husband. No answer. Called again, straight to voicemail. Then I called my brother-in-law, who lived less than 10 minutes away and was supposed to show up later to help with gifts. He picked up sounding half asleep. You need to come here. Now. Something in my voice made him stop asking questions. I told him his wife had asked me to leave my own house because her guests thought it belonged to them. Long silence. She told people what? I don't know. Come find out. The first guests arrived, smiling, carrying gift bags. One hugged my sister-in-law and said, "This place is gorgeous. You must be so excited to have all this space before the baby comes." My sister-in-law laughed nervously, glanced at me. I smiled at the guest. It's a great house. My husband and I worked hard for it. The guest looked between us. Oh. One syllable. It told me everything. My sister-in-law grabbed my arm, pulled me toward the kitchen. Can you not do this right now? Do what? Introduce myself in my own home? You're making it weird. I'm not the one who made it weird. My brother-in-law showed up about 20 minutes later, found us in the laundry room arguing in whispers. She switched her tone instantly, said I'd misunderstood a harmless request. He asked her point blank whether she'd told people they owned the house. No. He asked again. She said she'd described it as the family house. Did you print your names on the cards with our address? I asked. Her face went blank. I hadn't even seen the finished cards yet, I was just remembering the mock-ups she'd hidden from me. It was a guess. Her reaction answered it. My brother-in-law rubbed both hands over his face. Tell me you didn't. He told her she needed to correct it. She refused. Then the woman she'd been trying to impress arrived. I knew exactly who she was the second my sister-in-law's whole posture changed. She rushed into the hallway, hugged the woman, launched into a tour. My brother-in-law followed. I stayed near the kitchen, shaking, not trusting myself not to throw a decorative wooden sign through a window. A few minutes later, the woman walked into the living room and complimented the house. You two found a beautiful place, she told my sister-in-law. You made it sound smaller. My sister-in-law opened her mouth. I spoke first. It's mine, I said. My voice came out calm, which surprised even me. Mine and my husband's. We agreed to host the shower. The room went quiet in that specific way a room goes quiet when everyone's pretending not to listen. The woman looked at my sister-in-law. I thought you said you and your husband had moved. My sister-in-law gave a little laugh. I said the family had a new place. No, the woman said. You said your new house. My brother-in-law stepped forward before his wife could answer. It's my brother's house. We live in an apartment. The woman's face shifted from confusion to embarrassment. She apologized to me, even though she'd done nothing wrong. Then she turned to my sister-in-law and asked why she'd let her believe otherwise. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody needed to. The woman stayed less than an hour. Polite the whole time, but whatever opportunity my sister-in-law had been counting on was gone. The rest of the shower dragged on under a layer of tension so thick I could feel it in every conversation. People complimented the decorations and carefully avoided mentioning the house. My sister-in-law opened gifts with a smile that didn't move. My brother-in-law barely spoke. I stayed the whole time. Not because I wanted to, because leaving would have felt like helping her finish the lie. The last guest left in the late afternoon. The second the door closed, my sister-in-law disappeared into the guest bathroom and stayed there while the rest of us cleaned. One of her friends packed up leftovers. My brother-in-law hauled gifts to the car. I gathered plates from the living room, trying not to look at the empty spaces where my photos used to hang. Under a stack of napkins, I found the thank you cards. Their names printed across the top. Beneath them, my address. No mention of me or my husband anywhere. No wording that hinted the party had been hosted somewhere else. It looked exactly like a card sent from a couple settling into their own home. I carried one outside and handed it to my brother-in-law. He read it twice. "I didn't know," he said. I believed him, mostly because he looked like he might throw up. My sister-in-law came out and accused me of going through her things. I told her the cards had been sitting on my own table. She said the printer had misunderstood the layout. My brother-in-law asked why she'd approved it. She said she'd been overwhelmed. Then she started crying. Neither of us moved to comfort her. They left after sunset. My brother-in-law apologized at the door. She didn't say goodbye. Before they walked out, I held out my hand and asked for the spare key. She dropped it into my palm without looking at me. The second the door shut, I called my husband. He picked up on the first ring. "I'm sorry, I was on site." I told him everything. Not the short version. Everything, her asking me to leave, the guests thinking she lived there, the woman from the event business, the cards. He didn't interrupt once, not until I mentioned she'd taken our wedding photo down again. She did what? He promised to call his parents in the morning. I told him I didn't want a family meeting. I didn't want mediation. I wanted everyone to leave me alone. Naturally, his mother called before breakfast. She didn't ask if I was okay. She said she'd heard there'd been an incident at the shower. My sister-in-law had apparently called her sobbing, claiming I'd announced to the guests that she was poor and homeless. That was creative, considering she had an apartment and nobody had used the word poor at any point. I explained what actually happened. My mother-in-law admitted my sister-in-law shouldn't have implied the house was hers, then added that I could have waited until after the party to bring it up. How was I supposed to wait when the lie required me to leave? She was embarrassed. So was I. "But she's pregnant," my mother-in-law said. I looked at the wall where my wedding photo had finally been put back. "Pregnancy doesn't transfer ownership of my house." She called that insensitive. While we were still on the phone, the doorbell rang. A delivery driver stood there with 2 large boxes addressed to my sister-in-law. My address printed right underneath her name. I almost laughed. I carried one box inside and read the shipping label out loud to my mother-in-law. She paused. "Those are probably shower gifts." "I know what they are." "Why are they coming here?" "Because the shower was there." That doesn't explain why my address is her delivery address. She told me not to make the situation worse. I told her the situation had already arrived on my porch with tracking labels. The second I hung up, I texted my brother-in-law. He had 3 days to collect any packages. I'd keep them unopened in the garage. After that, I'd start refusing deliveries. He replied right away, apologized again. My parents came over that evening. My mother listened without interrupting while I showed her the card and the delivery labels. My father walked out to the garage, counted the packages, and asked, "Do you want me to build a fence?" My mother told me I'd been generous, and generosity didn't obligate me to sit still and be humiliated. I said I felt foolish for not noticing sooner. She shook her head. "Trusting someone isn't the same as being foolish," she said. But trusting them again without a reason to would be. That helped more than anything else anyone said to me. My sister-in-law blamed me. Not directly, of course. Directness was never her preferred sport. She told relatives that one little misunderstanding had cost her a chance to build support for her baby. Nobody mentioned that the misunderstanding required printed cards, altered photographs, a fabricated story, and a request that I vacate my own home. Apparently, when a lie involves enough planning, some people start calling it a mistake. For a while, I assumed the family gossip would be the end of it. I was wrong. The party was only the first loose thread. About 10 days after the last package got collected, my brother-in-law called my husband late at night. He'd been arguing with his wife about money. During the fight, she accused him of monitoring her too closely, and he reminded her they were trying to prepare for a baby on one income. She said he didn't understand the pressure she was under to make something of herself. He went to the kitchen to cool off and picked up the tablet they both used for bills, recipes, video calls. A message notification popped up from one of her cousins. He opened it. He read the whole thread. Months of it. My sister-in-law had told her cousin my husband would probably be out of town on the shower date. "I hate conflict," she wrote. "I'll make a face, but I'll agree eventually." She joked that the hardest part would be hiding enough of our photographs before the event woman arrived. She talked about my living room like it was a resource she'd secured, not a home I'd opened to her. One message read, "Once people see the pictures, they'll assume what I want them to assume." Another, "Claire won't correct me in front of everyone. She cares too much about looking nice." That one hurt more than the rest. The messages also uncovered money problems my brother-in-law hadn't known about. She'd rented decor, ordered custom stationery, paid for extra food, bought a dress on a credit card she'd kept hidden from him. Some of the payments came out of a small savings account they'd set aside for baby expenses. She'd told him the whole shower was being covered by family gifts. He confronted her. She admitted spending more than planned but called it an investment in her future. She said the event woman would have hired her if I hadn't sabotaged the introduction. He asked why she'd lied about the house. She said everyone exaggerates when networking. He asked if she understood she'd tried to push me out of my own home. She said I could have just gone to my parents' house and avoided the whole problem. That answer was apparently the moment something broke in him. He packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. Not as punishment, he told us later, because he didn't trust himself to keep arguing without saying something he couldn't take back. She called his mother immediately and claimed he'd abandoned his pregnant wife. By morning, the family group chat was full of vague messages about supporting expectant mothers through difficult times. My husband called his brother and got the whole story. Then my brother-in-law sent him the screenshots. My husband asked if he could show them to me. I said yes. I read them at my kitchen table after work. Still had my name badge clipped to my blouse. Dinner sat untouched beside me while I scrolled through months of casual planning. That was the part that actually stunned me, how casual it all was. She talked about using our house the way someone talks about borrowing a folding table. At one point her cousin asked if I might be offended. My sister-in-law replied, "She'll get over it. She always does." I cried then. Not loudly. Just sat there with tears running down my face, embarrassed that someone I'd tried so hard to accommodate saw my kindness as a weakness with predictable behavior. My brother-in-law called me the next day. I told him I was sorry he was dealing with all this. Then I said, "But I can't be the reason you make decisions about your marriage." "I know," he said. "This isn't only about you." That sentence was painful and relieving at the same time. He asked if I wanted the screenshots. I told him I already had them through my husband. He said I could use them if the family kept blaming me. I didn't plan to. Then my mother-in-law called and told me I needed to stop punishing my sister-in-law, because the stress might affect the baby. Something in me finally stopped caring about looking nice. The family group chat turned into a steady stream of indirect criticism aimed at me. I watched it happen for 3 days. My husband told his mother to stop. She said she was only encouraging peace. He said peace that required one person to accept a pile of lies wasn't peace. She accused him of choosing me over his family. "She is my family," he said. I loved him for that. I also hated that it had to be said out loud. The final message came from my mother-in-law on a Thursday evening. She wrote that private misunderstandings should never have been exposed at a celebration, that mature adults resolve conflict quietly. I opened the screenshots. Selected only the messages directly related to the house and the shower. Left out the financial details, those belonged to my brother-in-law. Removed anything that touched private medical information. Then I posted 6 screenshots with one sentence, "This is what happened, and I will not discuss it again." The group chat exploded. My mother-in-law called within minutes. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail accusing me of humiliating a pregnant woman, of sharing intimate family communication. She never once mentioned what the messages actually said. That became the pattern. Anyone defending my sister-in-law focused on the exposure, because defending the actual behavior was impossible. My sister-in-law sent me a long text. I'd destroyed her relationship with the family, damaged her marriage, cost her a job opportunity. Pregnancy hormones had made her act out of character. Then she said I'd always looked down on her. I read it twice. There were pieces of truth in it. I had judged her. I'd rolled my eyes after phone calls. I'd resented the comparisons and sometimes fired back with my own. I wasn't innocent in the history between us. But none of that gave her the right to erase me from my own home, or present my life as hers. I replied, "I have judged you before, and I'm sure you felt it. That doesn't excuse what you planned. Don't contact me unless it's about returning something that belongs to me." She wrote back, "You think you're perfect." I almost answered. Typed out 3 different versions. One included words I wouldn't say at work, or in front of my mother. Then I deleted all of it and blocked her. That wasn't maturity. It was self-preservation with a little spite mixed in. For the first time, the pressure eased. Not everyone admitted I'd been right. Families rarely offer clean corrections. They just change the subject and hope you'll mistake the silence for an apology. The relatives who'd messaged me went quiet. The group chat drifted back to recipes and medical updates. My mother-in-law turned cold but careful. My brother-in-law stayed at his friend's place. He kept going to appointments, kept paying the shared bills, but wouldn't move back until they'd worked through the debt and the lies with a counselor. She agreed, canceled once, agreed again, then accused him of trying to make her look unstable. He kept trying anyway, because the baby was due soon and hope makes even smart people repeat themselves. Meanwhile, I went to work, came home, slowly reclaimed the rooms. Peeled tiny adhesive strips off the backs of frames. Found bits of ribbon under the furniture. One rented display stand sat in the garage until my brother-in-law came to get it, alone. We talked in the driveway for a few minutes. He looked thinner. "She's still saying you ruined everything," he said. "I know." I told her the screenshots were her own words. "What did she say?" "That you forced her to write them. Made her feel inferior." I laughed once, no humor in it. "That's creative." He glanced toward the house. "I'm sorry." I believed he meant more than just the party. After he left, I stood on the porch and realized I'd spent weeks waiting for my sister-in-law to understand what she'd done. She might never understand. Or she might understand perfectly, and simply prefer a version where she was the victim. That realization didn't bring peace. It gave me a boundary instead. The baby arrived a few weeks early, healthy, but small enough that everyone worried for the first day. My husband drove back to be with his brother. I stayed home, because my showing up at the hospital would have turned a birth into another loyalty test. I sent flowers through my husband, along with a short message congratulating them. After the baby came, and she finally followed through on a counseling appointment, my brother-in-law moved back into the apartment, strictly temporary. He wanted to be there for the first weeks with their son, and to see whether counseling could make living together possible again. The hidden debt turned out worse than he'd first thought. Not enormous, but it mattered to a family already living close to the edge. Purchases unrelated to the shower. Late fees. Money pulled from savings with no discussion. He found out she'd also borrowed from a relative, and told that relative he knew. Every new discovery sparked the same argument. She'd admit the smallest possible piece, blame stress, then accuse him of cruelty for continuing to ask questions. They went to counseling twice. After the second session, she told him the counselor was biased. The counselor had asked whether the false story about the house was part of a larger pattern. My sister-in-law refused to go back. A month later, my brother-in-law moved out again. This time it wasn't a dramatic midnight exit. He rented a small room from a coworker, worked out a schedule for the baby, and started discussing a legal separation with a family law attorney. No courtroom scenes. Just paperwork, tired conversations, and two people dividing up bills while an infant cried nearby. Real endings are usually less cinematic than that. Mostly just exhausting. My mother-in-law blamed me for a while, not openly, since my husband had drawn a line, but in the way she talked around me. She referred to the shower as when everything changed. I corrected her once. The marriage had problems I didn't know about, but the party brought them out. No. Her choices brought them out. She looked away. Didn't answer. My husband finally came home for good when his project wrapped up. The night he walked in, he carried 2 suitcases inside, dropped them in the hallway, and stood in the living room looking around. "Where's our wedding picture?" I'd set it on a side table while repainting a section of wall that adhesive hooks had damaged. I showed him the spot. He picked up the frame, held it a second. "Can we put it back now?" That simple question cracked something open in me. I started crying, which confused him, until I explained that for months, the house had felt like something I was defending instead of somewhere I lived. We hung the picture back up together. It came out slightly crooked. He offered to fix it. I said no. For the next few weeks, we settled back into the life we'd originally expected. He complained about how I organized the pantry. I complained about his shoes by the door. We cooked dinner and argued over paint samples. Ordinary annoyances felt like luxury after months of family chaos. I also had to admit I'd changed. My husband pointed out that boundaries didn't require treating every family invitation like a potential invasion. He was right. I hated that. So instead of turning cold, I tried to get clearer. I stayed polite with his mother, asked who'd be at family gatherings before agreeing to come, never demanded anyone pick a side. I just stopped absorbing everyone else's discomfort so they could pretend things were fine. My sister-in-law tried reaching out through the baby, sent photos to my husband, added little notes like he should know his aunt. She never said she was sorry. Never acknowledged the cards, the messages, asking me to leave my own house. The baby became a bridge she expected me to cross alone. I sent gifts on holidays, through my husband. I agreed the child should know us. I also refused to meet with her privately, or host visits at our house. That distinction made a few relatives uncomfortable. It made me feel sane. By early fall, the separation between my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law wasn't temporary anymore. The family adjusted, awkwardly. My mother-in-law carried messages back and forth until both of them asked her to stop. Relatives who'd treated the marriage as sacred suddenly remembered noticing lies, strange purchases, arguments. I had no patience for their late observations. Where were these little epiphanies when I was the one being told to apologize? I vented about it to my husband. He said listening to them now would just keep me stuck in the same old argument. He'd gotten annoyingly wise during his time away. One Sunday, his parents hosted dinner. My sister-in-law would be there with the baby. My husband and I talked it over and decided to go. I didn't want permanent exile from every family gathering, and I didn't want the baby growing up watching adults pretend one room couldn't hold complicated history. I wore a dark sweater, brought a pie, rehearsed neutral sentences in the car. The evening was uncomfortable but manageable. My sister-in-law looked tired. She held the baby most of the night, spoke to me only when she had to. I said hello. Asked if the baby was sleeping better. No. We both laughed. Apparently infant sleep was the one subject stronger than mutual dislike. For a second, I glimpsed the version of us that might have existed, if she'd just asked for help instead of needing to become me. Then she ruined it. Near the end of dinner, she said quietly, "I hope you're happy." I looked at her. About what? She nodded toward my brother-in-law, packing bottles into a bag. You got what you wanted. The old version of me would have panicked. Rushed to explain. Softened my voice. Maybe even apologized for consequences I didn't cause. Instead I said, "I wanted you to tell the truth." She looked away. Same difference. No. It isn't. My mother-in-law walked in before the conversation could go further. My sister-in-law changed the subject immediately. In the car afterward, I told my husband what she'd said. He gripped the wheel. Do you want me to talk to her? No. Are you sure? Yes. She wanted a reaction she could use. I'm not giving her one. A few weeks later, my mother-in-law asked whether we could host a big family meal around the holidays. She framed it carefully. Our house had more space. Parking was easier. The baby would have a quiet room. Everyone could bring food. I wouldn't have to do much, she promised. The request landed so close to the beginning of the shower disaster that I almost admired her lack of self-awareness. No, I said. A pause. You don't have to answer immediately. I already did. She sounded hurt. This isn't the same situation. I know. I'm still saying no. She started listing reasons. I cut her off. Our home isn't available for large family events right now. How long is right now? I don't know. She said the family couldn't keep organizing itself around my discomfort. I told her the family was free to organize itself anywhere else. My hands were shaking when I hung up. I'd been direct, but I didn't feel powerful. I felt rude and guilty. Then my husband walked into the kitchen, heard what happened, and said, "Good. That's it. What else do you want me to say?" I don't know. Maybe tell me I wasn't horrible. You weren't horrible. You answered a question that annoyed me because it made the whole thing sound simple. Maybe it was simple. The holiday meal happened at a rented community room. We showed up for 2 hours. Nobody died from the inconvenience. My mother-in-law survived using a kitchen that didn't belong to me. The baby slept through most of it. My sister-in-law avoided me, and I avoided bringing her up. On the drive home, my husband reached across the console and squeezed my hand. The house is quiet, he said. I knew what he meant. Quiet used to feel lonely. Now it felt protected. Winter passed without another major blow-up, which mostly just meant everyone got better at avoiding certain subjects. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law finalized their separation agreement. He stayed involved with the baby. She stopped blaming me publicly, though relatives said she still called the shower the event that turned the family against her. That was harder to swallow than posting the screenshots. I wanted to chase every version of the truth into every room. I wanted every single person to understand exactly what she'd done and exactly why I reacted the way I did. But there's no final court of family opinion. There are only people who pick whatever version lets them sleep at night. One afternoon, sorting through a box in the spare room, I found the original invitation to the baby shower. I'd seen it before, but never really read it. It said, "Join us at our home as we celebrate our growing family, our home." I sat on the floor holding that card, and the old anger came flooding back with embarrassing force. Months had passed. The marriage had ended. The truth was out. And still, one printed phrase sent me straight back to that kitchen, holding a fruit tray while someone explained why I should leave. My husband found me there. "You okay?" I handed him the invitation. He read it, closed his eyes. "I never noticed." "Neither did I." "Do you want to keep it?" "No." I tore it in half, then into smaller pieces. Not some grand symbolic act, the cardstock was thick and it actually hurt my fingers. Halfway through I felt ridiculous. Started laughing, then crying, and my husband just sat on the floor next to me until both passed. "I hate that this still gets to me," I said. It wasn't only the party. It was the calculation. The assumption that I'd give up space to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. The fact that she was right about me, right up until the exact moment she pushed too far. I started noticing the same pattern elsewhere. At work, I was the one covering Friday shifts for an assistant manager with endless emergencies, staying late because a senior employee wouldn't learn a closing procedure. I was the one taking relatives' calls during dinner because they labeled every question urgent, so I changed a few things. Stopped covering shifts without notice. Trained the employee again, this time with documentation. Let the non-urgent calls go to voicemail. I didn't turn cruel. The branch didn't collapse. My relatives kept breathing just fine. The world adjusted with suspicious ease. My sister-in-law eventually sent an apology, through my husband. Not a message to me. A sentence to him. She said she regretted how everything happened. Does she regret what she did? I asked. He hesitated. She said she was under pressure and made bad choices. That isn't an answer. I know. I told him I didn't need him carrying messages anymore. If she wanted to apologize, she knew how to reach me. He agreed. She never did. Months later, an older relative suggested holding a big family reunion at our house in the spring. Said our yard was perfect, then added with a little laugh, "As long as nobody claims ownership this time." A few people laughed. I didn't, someone said. "No," I said. The relative blinked. No to the joke, or no to the reunion? Both. The table went quiet. My husband kept eating like nothing unusual had happened. The relative said she'd only been teasing. I told her the situation wasn't funny to me. She apologized, visibly uncomfortable, and changed the subject. The whole exchange lasted less than a minute. Nobody accused me of destroying the family. Nobody fainted. Nobody wrote a prayer into the group chat. That was the strange reward of just being direct. People learned faster once I stopped decorating the answer for them. In the spring, my husband and I hosted my parents and two close friends for dinner. It felt ordinary. Which was exactly what I'd wanted all along. My brother-in-law stopped by the next day with the baby. My sister-in-law was working, and it was his scheduled time. I'd agreed to the visit because I wanted a relationship with my nephew that didn't require pretending his parents' choices were mine to fix. The baby crawled across the living room, pulled himself up against the sofa, and reached straight for a framed photo. I caught it before it fell. My brother-in-law laughed. He likes destroying evidence. The joke caught me off guard. Then I laughed too. He apologized right away, but I told him it was fine. Coming from him, it didn't feel like mockery. It felt like two tired people acknowledging something ugly without letting it run every future conversation. Before he left, he stood near the shelf where our photos had been taken down. "I should have stopped it sooner," he said. "You didn't know." I knew she was competitive. I knew she was insecure. I didn't know she'd go that far. Neither did I. He nodded. I told him I didn't blame him for her plan. I did blame him for not asking more questions about the money and the event business, but that belonged to his marriage, not my forgiveness to give. He accepted that without defending himself. That conversation gave me more closure than any apology from my sister-in-law probably would have. Not because he took responsibility for her, because he faced the reality of it without asking me to soften it for him. Later that afternoon, my husband and I reorganized the living room shelf. It had gotten crowded: pictures, mail, keys, a ceramic bowl my mother swore was decorative even though it looked like a melted hat. I pulled photos I no longer liked, not because they were personal or messy, just because I wanted the space. Kept the picture of my parents. Kept our wedding photo. added one of my husbands standing on the porch the day he came back from the project, squinting in the sunlight with a suitcase at his feet. He walked in carrying a toolbox. "What are you doing, making this look less chaotic?" He studied the shelf. "I liked the chaos. You don't dust it." "Fair." He helped me move the frames. We argued over whether the melted hat bowl should stay. It stayed, because marriage is compromise, and because my mother would notice within 30 seconds if it disappeared. When we finished, he stood beside me, looked around. "It finally feels like ours again." I leaned into him. "It's been ours the whole time." I knew that. That was the difference. Ownership had never actually been in question. The deed, the payments, the keys, every box we'd carried through that door had always said the same thing. What changed was whether I felt allowed to defend it without apologizing for having something someone else wanted. A few days later, the family group chat started up again about another gathering. Someone suggested our house, most room, easiest parking. My husband looked at me across the kitchen. I typed, "We aren't hosting, but we'll come if the date works." No explanation. No mention of the shower. No apology. Someone suggested the community room instead. The conversation moved on. I set my phone down and went back to making dinner. My husband opened the cabinet with the fixed hinge, then closed it again. "What?" I asked. "Nothing. It just works now." I looked around, the shelf, the slightly crooked wedding photo, the plant I was somehow still keeping alive, the hallway paint I'd finally admitted I actually liked. The house was quiet, but not empty. It held our routines, our arguments, our questionable furniture choices, and the evidence of the people we chose to let in. For a long time, I thought keeping the peace meant making myself smaller inside my own life. Now, when someone asked for more than I wanted to give, I answered before resentment had a chance to dress itself up as hospitality. The answer was sometimes yes. Often no. Either way, it was mine.